We want to take the opportunity to welcome you to another edition of Let's Talk. We are delighted that you have chosen to join us, whether you are listening on Second Advent Radio live or you are watching on one of our social media platforms. We are delighted to have you, SLC Church Channel or SLC Adventist. We welcome you just the same. This afternoon, we continue our discussion we started last week. Last week, we had an amazing discussion on mitigation methodologies as we look at the concept of global warming. Again, we are discussing the whole concept of climatology, global warming, impacts and responses, and we're talking about mitigation responses and the Christian. And as we indicated last week, we have two special guests with us. We have Mr. Abdias Samuel, who is the gentleman in charge of NEMA, the National Disaster Services in St. Kitts Nevis, and we have Mr. Jack, that is, Ngumbah, who is the Deputy Director of the Nevis Disaster Management Services. We are delighted to say welcome to these two gentlemen. Gentlemen, we are delighted to have you with us this afternoon. Welcome again to Let's Talk as we continue this very intriguing discussion.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Last week, I had hoped for us to go a little further, but the concepts you shared, the information you presented was so meaningful, we had to take our time. And I'm going to say up front that I'm pretty sure that we're not going to finish today, so we are going to announce in faith that next week will be part 3, when we will wrap up this discussion. First thing I want to do is to invite a word of prayer. For those of you who are watching or listening, we invite you to bow with us as we pray. Eternal Father and our God, we thank you for the opportunity to discuss a very important subject. We are looking at the effects of global warming and, more importantly, mitigation measures and how, as Christians, we have an important role to play. We ask that you will be with our guests, grant them your peace, your understanding, and give them expressive skills so that as they share the information, it will prove meaningful in providing education and knowledge so that we can live better and be better prepared to withstand some of the effects of these hazards or potential threats. Take full control and have your own way. In Jesus' name, amen. Before we go into the discussion, I just want to recap a little bit from last week because we learned some amazing things last week. Last week, we discovered, one, that there is a lot in the Bible about mitigation. You know, you gentlemen shared about God telling Noah to build a flood, which is really, you may want to say, proactive measures for survival in terms of a widespread disaster. And you mentioned several other scripture passages. One that stood out in my mind was the famine in Egypt and Joseph telling Pharaoh, listen, there is going to be this famine. You need to make provision by building barns and storing so that when the time comes, we will have. And I have to admit that, you know, you read these stories all the time and you think of them from a certain perspective, but not from the perspective of disaster management. And so I want to thank you for sharing that perspective with us. Now, last week when we ended, I think it was Jack who was speaking to the issue of the disaster cycle. So if you can just review that, Jack, and then I want to jump into something very important with Mr. Samuel. Just a review, there may be one or two persons who were not with us last week, and I did ask about the disaster cycle. So Jack, if you can go that over with us, and we will pick up from there.
Okay, so briefly, the disaster management cycle, as we're looking at, it had to do first with mitigation. And the objective of mitigation is simply to reduce the long-term risk of life and property while fostering a resilient and prepared community. And of course, looking at it from the faith perspective, We have to be mindful of things like risk assessment and planning, spiritual and emotional resilience. That is very important, which I don't know if along the line we'll have to discuss that, the role of the church in building that capacity, and the next, community engagement. So the next principle or the next step for the cycle is preparedness. And preparedness simply has to do with ensuring readiness to respond effectively to disasters, focusing on spiritual, emotional, and practical preparedness in terms of your day-to-day aspect around your buildings. So there you have to look at your emergency plans. Every assembly deserves an emergency plan. And trainings for different hazards, what to do before, during, and after should be mandatory. And also psychological preparedness. I emphasize that over and over. The next phase will be response. And the response simply aims at, how do I put it? Provide immediate assistance and support, focusing on, remember, I'm taking it from the faith-based angle, focusing on spiritual, emotional, and physical well-being of the church and the members based on that situation that happens. If it's an earthquake, if it's a landslide, if it's a tsunami, a part of the building, the infrastructural damages, what happens to the lives of the members? How effective and how direct does the church respond to that? So those are key things we need to take note of. And finally, recovery, which have to do with reconstruction and rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is just the temporary phase of getting things back to normalcy, while reconstruction now is the long term to that. So that is how I can summarize that.
Now we're going to go into some more details in a little bit with some of those areas, because we want to be practical. But last week, while we were discussing, and Samuel, I'm going to come to you now, because while we were discussing last week and we spoke about the whole concept of what you gentlemen do, and you spoke about hazards and the implications. I want to get practical here. So let me ask you this. If I wish to purchase a piece of land to build a house, what are some of the measures that I must take into consideration in terms of disaster management? Because I think sometimes, we do things without sitting down to consider what if. I remember when I was thinking about purchasing a particular piece of land, and you guys, because you're in the system, may have access to, and you may be able to tell us this afternoon. But what I did is, after a very heavy downpour, when there's a lot of water running, etc., I took the opportunity to drive through the area to see what was happening, because I wanted to be sure that, listen, I'm not in a flood-prone area, that kind of thing. But talk to us. What are some of the things I need to consider in such a circumstance?
As to the first thing that you have to consider, and I will give you a personal example of mine. And sorry, a pleasant good afternoon and a pleasant Sabbath to all listeners, viewers via all platforms. So Pastor, back to the question. So one of the first things that you have to consider is requesting or doing what we call a risk profile of your area. What does that mean? Finding out what that area is susceptible to in terms of hazard, understanding the soil profile of that particular area, the impact profile of that area, and also looking at the behavioral impact of the societies and communities around you. That is also very critical, but you need to go to physical planning or whoever the vendor is for that particular piece of land and said, listen, what is the risk profile for this particular area? Now, let me give you an example, Pastor. I would have also, like you, sought to purchase a piece of land in a particular estate, nice area, and my training kicked in, and I said, let me ask about the risk profile. And Pastor, after 2 years of actually having the land, I actually did the risk profile, and then I found out from the risk profile that there are waterways actually that perforated that particular area. What does that mean? One, there's a potential that that same particular land can actually have a soil profile that will be susceptible to any type of degradation. Is also told me that there's a potential for water to run in that particular area. So imagine that I have a home and one day I come and my home is just underwater, or the home actually collapses because that particular area eroded outside of the normal view of human beings. And I was not aware or knowledgeable that this could have happened in that area. So these are some of the critical things that you need to do. Ask for a risk profile. No, Pastor, there was a development. I remember there was a particular development that was supposed to happen in a particular area here in St. Kitts. And when they brought the development to me, to my office, to meet with my team, the first thing I asked him was the risk profile. What's the risk profile? Where is the risk profile for this particular development? And when they said, well, Mr. Samuel, we did the environmental impact assessment, but we didn't have a risk profile. I said, well, okay, listen, this is what you are susceptible to this particular area. We showed them the inundation map we had for the area. We showed them some of the hazards for that particular area, which was rockfall, landslide, and a number of other activities. And to this date, the developers had to pull back and said they will have to reassess their commitment to using that particular area. So it's very important, Pastor, for us to look at the risk profile for these particular areas. Thank you.
Now, I want to ask a follow-up question, because you said something there that got me wondering. Well, I have two questions for you. First, where do we get the risk profile? Who do we ask for the risk profile? Is it the planning department?
Physical planning.
Physical planning.
They will show you all the contours. They will show you all the contours. They will show you the outlay of where water. They will give you the profile and the soil for that particular area as well. So all of that, Pastor, will be given to you by physical planning.
So now I have two more questions for you, because if that is known, why don't they just simply say, listen, this area is not fit for certain kind of residential property and that kind of thing, rather than allowing people to still sell land that may not serve a particular purpose?
I'm going to give you two views. One, there are mitigants that can be implied or applied that can mitigate against those particular factors. But then it's going to be very costly to the ordinary man and woman who wants to build a house. You're talking about, for example, if we have a soft soil profile that has moving, that has a silt type, well, a soft silt type profile that moves and it's not like clay that is solid, then that means that you're going to have to probably build pylons deep. That's what Japan does. Some deep pylons that go way down, maybe 60, 70 feet down, so that will help with the movement of the soil in terms of there's movement. Now, Pastor, that's going to be a significant cost, because it has to go in before you even think about the foundation. It has to go in before the footing of the foundation. So there are mitigants in some of these areas. Secondly, Pastor, small developing states, island states like ours, we are limited for land. There's limitation for land. So there are sometimes the state do take some actions to mitigate against those particular areas. And thirdly, Pastor, rightfully, there are political implications as well, which is beyond the control of the ordinary technical person.
And my follow-up question really was, you did indicate a mention that when you were thinking of or purchased that land, when you got the risk profile, you discovered that one of the possibilities was that, I think you mentioned that there may be erosion that were not visible to the human eye. Are you referring to some kind of on the soil waterways? Okay, I think you're muted.
Sorry, yes, Pastor, sorry about that. So earlier when you spoke about that, what you saw was the surface runoffs. You look at the first surface runoff. Just imagine those same surface runoffs being at these 50, 60, almost 100 feet below the ground. Those are not visible to you. So if though you have those type of flows on the ground, then Pastor, you know, it will be important for you to understand and have that historical knowledge of that particular area in the past, because a lot of times the historical data and knowledge of those areas are not taken into consideration by all parties involved. So that is very important and very critical.
So
And
something like that could lead to a sinkhole?
that's the point. Could lead to sinkhole, right?
Oh.
So that's why it is important to know the soil profile of that particular area. And I can share with you, I hope she's not on and she listens to me. She's listening to me right now. But the CMO, when we were going through COVID, we actually were looking at a piece of land. And when we look at the piece of land, and she did this, I told her to do the same thing. She did the risk profile. And when she did the risk profile, right away, it was discovered and advised to her by the surveyor that this piece of land will not be suitable, that piece of land that she was allotted would not be suitable for development or construction. So then she had to revert to, but again, it's your responsibility, Pastor, to make sure that you request that risk profile of physical planning or the surveyor. So sometimes the surveyor themselves have that data that they can provide you with that guidance.
Very instructive indeed. Thanks for that. Probably should have known that before I purchased my piece of land, but yes, so be it. You know, I say all the time, knowledge is golden, right? So we're being informed here. Now, I suppose that this whole matter of personal safety and responsibility, we're going to get some time to go into that. In fact, we in the Caribbean are prone to natural disasters. I think people generally think of hurricanes. We know that. We just had Beryl. But I want to suppose that there are other natural disasters. I mean, I'm not very far from Montserrat, and you know, we had a volcano there. I think St. Vincent had a volcanic eruption. Was it last year? What are the other types of natural disasters that we're prone to here in the Caribbean? Jack,
Okay. Yes, and just to put you again on the spot, we would likely say natural hazards.
Hazards, yes. I'm not a good.
Yes, natural hazards. I'm happy
hazards.
you would have brought that up. There are several natural hazards the Caribbean region is prone to, and they are mostly from geophysical, climatological, and hydrological, but I'm going to list few of them. You have hurricane and tropical storms, which we are aware of, and earthquake is something that is also a challenge to the region. A part of earthquake, we have volcanic eruptions. We just witnessed what happened in St. Vincent the other day. And flooding is something to be mindful of as well. Landslides, tsunami, drought is really taking a toll due to, I'm sure, the excessive heat would have led to a lot of evaporation, which leads to water shortage and lack of rain. Then we have the climate change impact that goes on erosion, loss of biodiversity, and negative effects on livelihoods and health. So it's very important you ask that question. It's going to help us not to be hurricane-centric, because one tradition in the Caribbean is once the hurricane season is over, it's like, hallelujah, nothing is going to go wrong again until a hurricane season. A part of hurricane that has a steady season, the other hazards are not like that. They can happen anytime, anywhere, when we even least expect, like in the case of an earthquake. So it's mindful to be aware of this hazard. And those are just natural hazards. Man-made, we have several of them that we can list.
Well, when we talk about the natural hazards, you know, you mentioned earthquake, hurricanes, the storms, let's just say tropical cyclones. And then you mentioned tsunami. I think we became mindful, aware of the effects of tsunami after we had that big tsunami in Sri Lanka some time ago. But you are indicating that this is something that can impact the Caribbean. Can we go a little more into that, and how do we prepare for tsunami? What mitigation measures, if any, can we take with respect to tsunamis?
Pastor, just before Jack comes in, it's important to note we have a subsea volcano, which is Kikin and Kikin is found in that area between St. Vincent and Grenada, mainly closer to Grenada. Kikin is one of those natural features of our Caribbean region that can actually cause one of the tsunamis that we may experience in the Caribbean region. And also, it is very significant to note is that we have a submergent plate between the American plate and the Caribbean plate, where the 12-1 is going under, the American plate is going under, the Caribbean plate is going on top. And that type of movement that happens there, if we get that sudden movement, there's the potential for us to also experience a tsunami. I think it was last year before, we would have had a 7.1, I think it was a magnitude earthquake that would have happened in the region between Cayman Islands and Jamaica. And that triggered a tsunami alert for us here in the Caribbean region. So it's important for us to highlight that this is a high probability and possibility, and is not something that is only applicable to the Pacific Ocean, the Asian Ocean thereabout. It's also a threat to us here in the Caribbean region. I just wanted to make sure that I highlight that.
Very useful. Yes. All right.
Thanks.
Yes,
Okay.
Jack, go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Samuel, for that. I'm really happy with what he would have said, highlighting the fact that tsunami is not like a far-fetched hazard for the Caribbean. Is one nothing that even Nevis would have experienced a devastating tsunami, that is in 1690, which wiped out an entire city, which was the capital, Jamestown. And if we look further, we realize that also in 1867, after a magnitude of 7.5 earthquake around St. Thomas and St. Croix, there was a tsunami that was triggered. And in 1918, an earthquake of also 7.5 would have triggered a tsunami in the Mona Passage, as well as in when we come to the 21st century, 2004, while not directly in the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean, that's what we were talking about, highlighted the potential for devastating tsunami, prompting an increase in awareness and preparedness effort in the Caribbean region. So these are key things we should be mindful of that is not far from us. And Mr. Samuel highlighted some of the causes for tsunami, which I may just touch it a little. He was talking about that which could be caused by a volcanic eruption. That is something we should be mindful of. Earthquake is the #1 common cause of a tsunami above magnitude 7. Volcanic eruption is another. We have landslides. One that I'm so afraid of is the submarine landslide, which happens on the sea level. So when it takes place, you don't even know. Just imagine at 2 a.m. such a situation occurs where there is a high alert on a tsunami. By the time the alert is being sent, people are fast asleep. What is going to be the outcome? That is what I'm so heavily afraid of. And there is a very rare tsunami cause, the meteorite impact, which is a weather-related impact, but this is very rare, yet it can also occur. So those are some of the causes for tsunami. And what do we do before, during, and after? Briefly, take note of the tsunami warnings. One of the key warnings, when you find the sea receding, you just find the sea going backward. Be mindful of that. And when you get that roaring, that shake, which usually come from the magnitude 7 and above earthquake, that which you can't even stand, the advice in such a case is start running to higher grounds. And in the higher grounds, the key thing is how do you get quickly to the higher grounds? In St. Kitts and Nevis, we would have already identified the route that leads to the safe zones. So you just follow the signs in all the parishes and the districts. It will help you get to that level, which is above, is it 100, above 100 meters height. Once you get that and above, it is safer in terms of a tsunami attack. And if persons can apply such, it's going to help, because wherever you are, just be mindful in case a tsunami occurs. How quick can I get to higher ground? That is a solution to it.
What is your sense of either of you can respond, but Jack said just now that in St. Kitts and Nevis, the path has been made clear. But what is your sense of the extent to which the population, the average person in the population, gives attention to this and are aware that, hey, this is what you do in the event of a tsunami? Because sometimes you do drills, sometimes you give education, and people say, oh, I've never seen that in my lifetime. It's a waste of time. What's your sense of how they have accepted what you folks have been trying to share?
Well, Pastor, I must say, I want to add into what Jack was saying. I think it's a Nevis is recognized as a tsunami-ready twin island state, one of the few Caribbean islands that has achieved that level of certification. In terms of the question that you've asked, would the population ever be so prepared? And that's a question, that's a rhetorical question, Pastor, because the reality is every year we carry out, just like hurricanes, we carry out a lot of educational awareness campaigns. Every March, we have what we call the tsunami exercise, Caribbean wave. We call it Caribbean wave, whereby we test a number of the areas, we test our notification and alerts, we test the responses, we test specific areas. We have actually tested many areas around the island of St. Kitts. So the knowledge is there. The problem, Pastor, just like hurricane seasons, is the behavioral change and the cultural change in particular that is needed. I am of the belief that we have not reached that stage that we have had the necessary cultural change and adaptation to really, measure how far we have penetrated in terms of societies. No, we have targeted the specific groups. For example, the vulnerable groups. We have a large migrant population. We also have targeted the special population, persons who are differently abled. We have also targeted the religious society, faith-based societies. We have brought in the private sector. We made sure that the public sector, and we have actually approached it from a communal stage where we started from the community up to the policy level. The thing about this, Pastor, like everything else, you will have gaps, and persons in particular may not have that particular interest. But yes, the knowledge, I believe that we have penetrated some upward of 90% of our population. That 10% to me, in my honest opinion, humblest opinion, is those that really don't want to, for example, don't want to accept. Now, Pastor, for example, when we did our tsunami exercise, we utilized the two telecommunication service providers, Flow and Digicel, as well as the cable, to be able to send out message. So everybody who had a cell phone had received that SMS. We also use the radio stations to make sure that we send those messages through the radio station. So if you didn't get them via the text, you would have heard it with the emergency broadcast interruption system through the radio stations. We also use the social media platforms. And in addition to that, we have the police and the defense force and the fire services with ear horns. We had them with different mechanisms going around and to the communities and actually educating the community and asking them to go to higher ground. No, Pastor, our impact is based on a 30-meter or 100-foot wave. That is what the scientists have indicated to us, that that's the highest wave that we may receive in St. Kitts and Nevis. No, we prepare for worst case scenario than that. So we have an inundation map where we know we're a 30-meter wave or 100+ foot wave how far inland it will come in. And that's what Jack was saying, that we have already established assembly points around the island. We have inundation maps where we know how far inland the water is going to come. However, Pastor, it's important to note that this information is distributed, it's shared. You will be amazed that people take the papers and sometimes you find them on the streets or you find them in the garbage, etc. So that's why I made the point that as much as we attempted to penetrate, our actions has penetrated at least 90% of the population. The problem is, Pastor, how much of the population now has actually absorbed that information, and that's something somewhat difficult to measure.
Now, in the event of a tsunami, because I'm trying to imagine a situation where, you know, I lived in Nevis, so I know that accessing higher grounds on Nevis should not be a challenge at all. But in other territories, the alarm that, hey, a tsunami is coming, you may have 10 minutes to respond. They may tell you, you know, in 10 minutes, try to get to a higher ground. I can see chaos in some areas if people are not very disciplined to follow strict instructions, because you can have traffic jam, you can have people running just out of shock and disorientation. So a tsunami can prove to be a very dangerous event, and I can see where hazard can turn to disaster quite quickly, because a lot of times if we don't handle it well, if we don't respond well, we turn the hazard into a disaster.
Definitely, Pastor. And you're quite correct. I think, Pastor, when you yield back to, we have to have that cultural change. If we have that cultural change, and I love the model of the Japanese. I spent 3 months in Japan. Jack spent at the same time as well in Japan. And Pastor, it's just amazing to see from a child to the elderly, the discipline they have in terms of once they hear that siren, the actions they have to take, the responsibility of the different demographic group in the society. It's just amazing to see how they operate. And Pastor leads us back again when Jack was talking about Noah and the ark. We saw the discipline that happened with Noah and his family. And we saw what happens when we have ill-disciplined individual not acting in the right way. What happens? You can perish. But if you act in a disciplined and orderly manner and listen and obey the guidance, guess what, Pastor? You have the possibility of existing longer.
Well, while we are talking about tsunami and the threat, well, just one other thing, because you mentioned Abdias, Kikanjemi, which around St. Vincent region, and I think Jack mentioned something in the region between Cayman and Jamaica there as likely events that could trigger tsunami. Now, I know that there are volcanoes elsewhere. We do have volcanic eruptions can cause earthquakes as well. Am I correct? And I remember back in 1974 in the Caribbean, we had a pretty major earthquake. That was my introduction to real extensive earthquake, you know, the 8th of October, 1974. I still remember that earthquake. So it almost appears as though these things can come out of nowhere. I know it's not out of nowhere, but when you least expect them to. And depending on the magnitude and where it is, we may be preparing for something that is triggered by Kikanjemi when it's much closer to our doors. And then I also do understand, and you may want to just expand on this a little bit, that it depends on the depth, because you can have a 5 magnitude that is closer to the surface and create as much damage as a 7 magnitude that is further down.
Yes, Pastor. Everything about the measurement of these seismic activities is based on the depth of these earthquakes. The deeper, the shallower they are, the more it will be felt, because that means that it's close to the surface and it's going to send that ripple effect across. Okay, the deeper they are, the effect will be a little lower, but it can be very damaging, because once they move that earth activity below really opens up, right? As you said, it could cause those sinkholes and everything to cave in. So that is how it measures. So when you see that we get data, it measures the depth and the intensity of this quake. As Pastor, just imagine two things and going in the opposite direction. And as they go in the opposite direction, it's just a little nail keeping them from, okay, allowing passage to each other. So what happened with this seismic activity is that once these rocks are actually moving, because you know it's a moving plates, and Pastor, once these plates moved, if it's done at the surface level where it's rather shallow, then we have the potential for a lot of activities. If it's something that is rather deep, then it may not be as intense as a shallow earthquake.
Very well. Now, earlier, Jack mentioned, gave us a summary of the disaster management cycle. Let's get a little practical now. Let's assume, and we had a fresh example in Union Island and Carriacou just the other day. But if there is a major occurrence of, let's say, hurricane or earthquake that impacts a particular territory, what I want to find out is how should we respond after the fact? What should the persons on the ground do, and what should those in other territories not affected do? I learned that from my disaster management course that the way you respond to a disaster, to a particular situation, can determine whether it turns out to be a disaster or not. So let's say an earthquake happens, a really destructive earthquake. There's lots of power, buildings crumbling, roads impassable, etc. Or a major hurricane. How do we deal with that? The average person. Just speak to that for me. What do we do so that we do not create chaos?
Pastor, I'm going to allow Jack to lead, and then I will bring in the overall perspective. Jack?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. And I'm happy you keep taking something or taking us to the fact that when things are not properly handled, then it makes the situation worse than how it was. So the very first thing, let's narrow it to a hurricane. After a hurricane, first of all, the common person is not the one to determine that the hurricane is over. They are supposed to get the all clear being announced by the Met Office by either the radio station, ZIZ, Von Radio on Nevis, or from the disaster management website or social media pages. When they get that official information, that is when they will know the place is safe for them to even leave their homes. Why do we say so? The eye of the hurricane could be passing and everything looks so normal. And they tell themselves, okay, hurricane is over. So let's go out and see. In Nevis, they say those who like to look news. By the time they get on the hurricane, the eye now shows them its tail. And it becomes one of the worst scenarios that can ever occur to them, which that becomes a disaster. So point number one, they have to wait for all clear. And when that is done, being officiated that you are now safe to get out of your home, what will be taking place is that disaster management organigram will set up what we call damage and loss assessment, which will be taking place. However, for them in their homes, they shouldn't really wait for those officials to come by them to assess what has been damaged. They should take responsibility upon themselves to check the immediate surroundings, how many windows have been damaged, to know what takes place. And above the aspect of the the infrastructural concern, it is better also to be your neighbor's keeper. which will encourage persons to now check on the brother, the sister who lives nearby, what would have happened to them. But before doing that, you ensure your own home is safe, and you take note on that. And while all this is taking place, there is that need for a constant ears open to the update that will be coming from the Disaster Management Office. So cleanup is very necessary. Don't wait for the government to do all the cleanups for you. Do that which you can. Clean your own yard. If everyone takes it upon themselves to clean their yard, it reduces, the debris and those stuff where maybe the extra wind that passes around would have led them to further damage by flinging them to people's homes. But another component, especially as we are talking from the church end, is the psychosocial support. It is very important that at such a time, the Christian faith, especially, now be sensitive to those who would have been impacted, and key words of encouragement and also gesture of comfort be considered at such a time. Then it will help, because what I realize some persons do, they try to make disaster management to be left in the hands of the Superman, the disaster office. It is everybody's business. They need to know their role as well as ours.
I think before Abdias comes in, the psychosocial supports, I kind of just want to share that. I know that in major disasters, I once had a neighbor after, was it Hurricane Hugo, whose house was, it was a new construction. And I remember after the all clear was given and I went out, and I viewed my neighbor's property, it was as though there was nothing there, that no house, no foundation, nothing. It was just gone. And I saw that neighbor for a while would just go to that place and sit down and stare. And you knew that there were some emotional challenges there, the loss, how you deal with the magnitude of the loss. And a lot of times after a disaster, people may eventually get food and shelter, but to cope with their loss, I remember the first time I went to Montserrat after the volcanic activity, and with some police escorts, we went into Plymouth, and what I saw numbed me. Right, the Plymouth that you knew, going through Valham Valley and those kinds of things, and seeing, the places we are walking, and they tell you 2-story houses under where we are walking. And for the people who lost all of that, one gentleman told me that he had sold a property like a month or so after the volcanic eruption. The gentleman that bought that property, and then the volcanic eruption came and leveled it. So the magnitude of the loss, the impact, and how you respond to that, I think that is something that is really, really very significant.
True. And before Mr. Samuel would have stepped in, the aspect of psychosocial support, I still want to hit hard on it. Let's look at this short scenario. There is this, you have a building that the roof, came out, but nobody in the building is injured. Then you have this other building, everything is intact. However, one galvanized flung and got a 6-year-old child's mom, and she died. If you are not careful, a lot of emphasis, of course, will be on the building that the roof is out, and the 6-year-old child who is in trauma, losing the mother, may be considered a lesser case. Oh, don't worry, the building, yes, okay, let's focus on that. I'm trying to say disaster management should reach a point where it becomes people focus. People focus. When we get it that way, it helps and bring the holistic thing, because at the end of the day, everyone wants to know that someone cares about them. Yes, if we are not careful, we may be so caught up with the infrastructural aspect at the expense of the people who even own the infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
So psychosocial support, I just wanted to emphasize that.
Very well. Abdias?
Thank you, Pastor. I want to bring you use a word which was practicality. So, Pastor, here's the reality. No, I'm not advocating for persons to not to adhere to our, because I have to be involved in some key and critical decision-making processes. I am the technical arm to the Prime Minister who's going to be making the critical decisions. I had a conversation with the Commissioner of Police, the Commander of the Defense Force. Just the three of us had a conversation, and we spoke about the all clear. And we said, guys, we have to be practical. Three of us sitting around, and said, we have to be practical. There is no way, Pastor, and to the viewing and listening audience, that after an impact, while we're going to say, hey, listen, stay home, stay put, shelter in place, and my roof gone, everything gone, that I am going to stay there, Pastor. It's not practical. It's not going to happen. All we are saying is this. Listen, if you have to move, move safely, move securely, and go straight to the source that can assist you. Don't use the opportunity to go and do any type of loitering, do any extra activities, which is take up people things, right? Loot anything. What we're saying, go to the shelter, find the nearest government or partner agency that will give you the assistance. So I said, Commissioner, you realize that we don't have the space to lock up everybody who don't adhere to the shelter in place orders, right? Or shut down orders. The reality is the police and the security forces and those out there will have to apply that level of humanity, empathy, and sympathy to the situation, balance it between that and the law. So what are we asking the public to do real quickly, because in the interest of time? One, prepare, have that plan. You need to have that plan. If you have the emergency plan that tells you who, what, where, when, if, then you're going to be quite fine. Where do you go if this happens? Who are the key persons to contact if I need this? Worst case scenario that this happens, this is the action I take. So if you have that, these are some of the basic and common things that you need to know and to apply in the event. No, it's easier said than done, Pastor. My roof gone. You hear the stories of persons who had to go into the cabinet, had to go into the rooms. It's difficult. Now, the next thing, Pastor, during the storm, if you know your household cannot take it, please go to a shelter. That's what the shelters is for. Go to the shelter. It's just a temporary space. Hopefully it doesn't remain permanent. But if you lose everything, go with the mindset to be able to be there for a while. Pastor, the next thing is that you have to condition the mindset. And Jack was talking about psychosocial. Easier for me to say, but you have to condition your mindset, Pastor. And this is where the faith base has to come in. Condition your mindset that, hey, I'm going to be facing a challenge. And these are the probabilities and scenarios and the outcomes of this challenge. You have to. If you don't do that, Pastor, then you're going to be in challenge. For example, I take a little time for myself. I come in my office, Pastor, I lock my door, and I pull out, I have my little Bible, a small little Bible that, my dad gave me way back when I was in Pathfinder days. I have that little Bible with me. Read a verse, relax, let all my adrenaline go down, and then Pastor, go provide the guidance. This is the same approach that we have to have. Now, post-impact, as soon as the situation, you get a little sunlight, you get to see, Pastor, here's the reality. People are going to move. However, we are going to advise you to stay in place. Don't move, but people are going to move. If you're going to move, if you have a family of 10 and you need to move, let 2 move. Move in pairs. Allow 2 to move. Let the others stay in place to avoid more chaotic situation. As you said, scenarios within the scenarios can happen. For example, there could be a landslide that happened. There could be significant rockfall. There could be sudden floods. Flash flood that can happen. There could be, lightning and thunder that can do. We saw that in St. Martin, 3 persons were injured from lightning strike the other day. So Pastor, there's the possibility that we may have power generated power lines or other equipment that may shock you. The other thing, Pastor, is that please support the security forces, because what will happen is that you have just lost everything. You see a supermarket, you're actually seeing a pot of gold. So then persons may be encouraged to loot. And this is what we do. This is why we don't want persons on the street, because we don't want to overwhelm our prisons. We don't want to overwhelm our security forces, and we don't want to overwhelm our healthcare in particular and the shelters. So looking at these critical facilities, Pastor, sorry, Pastor, I'm talking to you from the strategic point of that.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at these things, Pastor, we have to make sure that we take that individual responsibility to partner with the state. It is a balanced approach between the state and the ordinary citizens and residents of St. Kitts and Nevis. So I just wanted to share that. Follow the guidelines of Pastor. This is my last thing. Follow the guidelines of the professionals that are prepared to do this job. The guidelines, if you follow the guidelines, you will not go wrong. Pastor, you can speak to the Bible and the many stories we could lead to in the Bible of persons that once they obeyed God, they saw the fruitful outcome. And when they disobeyed, what happened? And we saw that in Sodom and Gomorrah. Don't look back. And those who look back, what happened to them, Pastor? And those who actually listened to God, what happened to them? And again, I want to make it reference to the 10 wise virgins. We saw what happened in that story. So biblically, we have too many stories that can help us as faith-based personnel to strengthen us, to be able to support us. So, Pastor, these are so many things. I mean, I could give you a slew of things here, Pastor, but I just want to kind of summarize it to those basic things that can be done. And have basic essentials, Pastor. For example, you and I were talking about earlier about BVI. We had a year in BVI. When I tell people to get some money, take even a little money, and put it in your pocket and secure it. Pastor, we had a situation in the BVI whereby the bank machines were not working in 2017. And we saw that caused a significant crisis. So if persons do not have access to basic essentials during or after the impact, let me say post-impact, Pastor, that in itself is going to be a crisis within the crisis in itself. So imagine supermarkets are not available. Imagine that the banking system is down. Pastor, one of the things I said to the telecommunications providers, I said, listen, if you guys don't have a strategy to make sure that your customers have internet access immediately or soon thereafter, any impact, Pastor, we're gonna have chaos. People prefer internet over food. So this is why, Pastor, it's the reality. This is why, we partner with the telecommunications provider, and we as the state are making sure that we have these accessibilities for the general public in order to make sure we don't have civil disorder. Sorry, Pastor, it's a passion for what I do.
I can sense that, but I can see that individuals would be anxious to get in touch with their families overseas, let them know that they're doing well and that kind of thing, definitely. And I want to put this question in, this maybe final question for today, and gentlemen, definitely we're going to be back next week, because we want to focus on, we have been talking about the national hazard, so to speak, but what about the individual things? What happens in your home, in your personal life, etc. And we want to zero in on that. And as we have been discussing here, the whole matter of responses. I mean, we have ADRA, Adventist Development and Relief Agency. We, as a church, we have a humanitarian arm. We have a responsibility to help our neighbors. Again, last week we spoke about the fact that we are supposed to be environmental stewards. And this is where I want to end. This question, generally, yeah, definitely my final question for today because of the time. What are some common behaviors that persons engage in that can be a challenge to disaster management? And let me use an example, because I see so often a person driving along the road and they drink a bottle of soda and they just throw it out the window. How does this and other similar behavior create a challenge to disaster management?
That's okay.
Yes.
That's something which really gets my attention all the time. First of all, what are some of those behaviors? You have behaviors like littering and improper waste disposals, ignoring of, evacuations, or that Mr. Samuel was mentioning that in what he was saying. Some could be building in high-risk areas. Another could just be non-compliance to building codes, deforestation and land degradation, the spreading of misinformation. Another thing could just be negligence of preparedness measures. And we have things like vandalism and looting with poor land use practices. You can name many of those. And the worst thing that I've realized is when mankind build on a mindset on negativity. Let me explain it briefly, because people fail to understand they can easily change. Change is so easy till the moment you know it is easy. Till the moment you know it is easy. But if you don't know it's easy, it becomes difficult. So some of the practices, persons continually do the wrong, and they say, this is what we have always been doing. I really want to highlight the fact that the key to us handling these bad behaviors, which are the triggers to man-made hazards and its impact, is establishing more of marketing information to them to a point that gets them, according to Maslow's theory, the hierarchy of needs. Maslow's put it in a way that what we see, the self-actualization, when information reaches that point, persons connect to it and they want to copy that lifestyle. I want to say how we as disaster management handles this in order to combat these behaviors. Mr. Samuel earlier talked of how well we would have disseminated. That is true. But what I want it to come in is that which gets to the face of the persons to a point of valuing it, that this is what I need. And that is only to use a medium that can highlight self-actualization. An example, look at COVID. How many of us used to wash and clean our hands all the time? It was something, a habit that for so long we never did. But the way the message came, everyone had their hands clean, sanitized, and everything. It changed in a minute. So it means people can change. Yes, so but the point is how we literally lead them to that change. So I will encourage us first from disaster office to connect with people to their various target audience system. Teenagers get key component that can, what we call pointers, people that they literally connect to make them as role models, they see and they want to copy, especially as a church. They always, when you stand and preach the same thing on the pulpit, it becomes yea and amen. So in that case, we'll find ourselves eradicating such behaviors.
All right, Mr. Samuel, you want to add anything to that?
Yes, Pastor, Jack gave me 30 seconds, so I'm gonna wrap up in 30 seconds.
Okay.
Pastor, I grew up in West Bonga, the way it is like a street that's more like it was a waterway which they turned into a street, view that way, that leads straight into the sea. And Pastor, every time every time it runs, we have significant rainfall, we have storm passing, everything. Pastor, this is when people used to actually take all the garbage. They take everything, old tires, everything you could think about, and they just throw it in the middle of the cut, because the water, the force of the water, and the volume of the water that was flowing through that particular area was able to push these things down the ground. What they didn't see was the long-term effect that they were actually having on that. Talking about the road in itself, being the integrity of it being compromised. You're talking about clog, the waterways will get clogged, and then Pastor, what happens when it floods? That water is then diverted into people's property, flooding people's property. In addition to that, then everything goes to the seaside. And then when it goes to the seaside, it's settled in the sea. So then persons don't have appropriate access to that seaside area because it's going to endanger them. Then, Pastor, in addition to that, then they actually impact the marine life of that particular area. So that gentleman or woman that's taking that particular bottle, that individual that takes that bottle, whether it be a glass bottle or a plastic bottle, they're actually causing significant damage. And Pastor, they're actually making it more difficult for us to be able to restore the country and give access to that same particular individual in terms of the cleanup and the debris management that we have to do post impact from that. Because if that person actually recycles that bottle or dispose of that bottle properly, is one less bottle that we have to manage in terms of the debris clearance post impact of any activity. So it's important that we as citizens exercise that responsibility because it has a long-term impact and effect on what we do faster. So we can elaborate more on that faster, but in the interest of time, I don't want to keep you any longer.
Well, certainly. Thank you so much. Thank you two gentlemen. We are out of time, but we are going to wrap up this discussion next week. And like I said, next week, we are going to zero in on the not so much the national component, but we're going to zero in on the smaller scale things. What happens to how do I reduce the risk of fire in my house? You know, how do I deal with things like preparing for earthquake in my house and those kinds of things. Our churches, you know, what are some of the safety measures that we need to implement there in public spaces where we gather so that we can avoid a tragedy? If on a Sabbath morning a fire breaks out in the church, what are the likelihood that everybody's going to get out alive? A simple construction error can make a big difference. The way your door swings can make a big difference. So we will talk about those things next week. Our time is up. So thank you, and we will see you next week when we continue and wrap up this very intriguing discussion. So that's all the time until 3 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time next week. God bless.